Imagine being tasked with uh, building the most impenetrable fortress in the galaxy.
Yeah.
Like, you spend decades meticulously calculating load-bearing tolerances, overlapping fields of fire.
And just the psychological impact of sheer unyielding stone.
Right.
Right.
You pour your absolute genius and the blood of thousands of your own people into its walls. It's this masterpiece of architectural defiance.
Uh,
And your reward, the masters you built it for, turn around and order you to test those very defenses by throwing your own brothers against the walls until they bleed to death.
just to prove the concrete holds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All while someone else takes the credit for the victory.
Yeah, I mean, it completely shatters the transactional nature of warfare and, well, civilization, really.
Oh, for sure.
We operate on this baseline assumption that genius and foundational sacrifice will eventually be rewarded with, at the very least, a footnote in the history books.
Yeah, pat on the back.
Right. But when you look at the 41st millennium, and specifically the subjects of today's stack of sources, that comforting illusion is just utterly vaporized. We are examining a landscape where pragmatism has been surgically stripped of all empathy.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a massive, genuinely chilling compilation of sources for you. It's titled Iron Warriors, the Architects of Bitter Logic.
It is a heavy stack of reading.
Oh, it really is. And, to understand them, think about the worst group project you've ever been a part of.
Oh, no.
Like, you did the grueling research, you built the presentation, you stayed up for 3 nights straight,
Yeah.
and your partner just casually puts their name on the title slide and walks away with the accolades.
We've all been there.
Right. Now, multiply that resentment by 10,000 years, arm it with heavy artillery, and just remove all moral constraints.
That is honestly the perfect psychological primer for this discussion, because to truly grasp the horror of the Iron Warriors, you have to actively discard any traditional romanticized notions of conflict.
Yeah, throw them out.
Entirely. Throw out the concepts of glory, honor, valiant champions, all of it. We aren't just analyzing a fictional military force today. We're undertaking a deep, clinical exploration of a 10,000-year grudge.
A very heavily armed Greg.
Exactly. We're looking at what happens when a legion of hyper-intelligent engineers realizes that the universe only values them as cannon fodder.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because that realization that you are nothing but an expendable tool, it doesn't just stay compartmentalized in a soldier's mind.
No, it bleeds into every single thing they do.
Right. Which brings us to the core philosophy of the IV Legion. Before we can even look at the battlefields they've ruined, we have to map out their psychological baseline. And the source material uses a very specific phrase to define them.
Yes, iron logic.
Iron logic.
Yeah, and iron logic is a brilliant encapsulation because it is so fundamentally barren. I mean, when you think of knights or spacefaring legions, you naturally default to the heroic narrative, right?
Banners waving in the wind, impassioned speeches before the charge.
Exactly. Champions seeking out enemy champions to prove their martial superiority. The Iron Warriors look at that entire theatrical production and just see catastrophic inefficiency.
Wow. Inefficiency.
Yeah. To them, war is not a path to honor. War is a brutal, unfeeling equation that simply needs to be solved.
And an equation doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your bravery or your legacy.
Not at all.
The sources emphasize this so heavily. They aren't looking for a good fight to test their mettle. They're looking for the correct mathematical outcome.
Right.
I was reading through the field reports in these texts, just trying to find a real-world analog for how they operate. And I think of them like the ultimate disgruntled structural engineers.
Oh, I like that.
Like, if your traditional glory-seeking warriors are artists painting a masterpiece on the battlefield with their swords, the Iron Warriors are mathematicians solving a demolition equation. And the required answer is always 0 survivors.
What's fascinating here is the tactical advantage of that mindset. It is staggering. By completely rejecting the trappings of ego and glory, they become a nearly insurmountable opponent.
Because they don't care about looking good.
Exactly. Think about standard military strategy. If an enemy commander cares about honor, you have a lever to pull. You can bait them into an ambush by insulting their pride.
Yeah, call them a coward, draw them out.
Right. You can challenge their champion to single combat just to stall for time. You can draw them out of a fortified position because their ego demands they meet you in the open field.
But you can't do that to the Iron Warriors.
You absolutely cannot do that to the Ivy Legion.
Right, because you can't shame a calculator into making a mistake. Like, you can yell insults at a bulldozer all day, but it's still going to level your house.
Precisely. They cannot be baited, they cannot be taunted, they can only be calculated against.
And their math is usually better than yours.
Oh, their calculations are always far more ruthless than yours because their variables are limited exclusively to overwhelming firepower, meticulous logistical planning, and absolute eradication.
They literally measure victory strictly in rubble and ash.
Yes. If the objective is to destroy a fortress, they do not care if it takes an epic, heroic duel at the gates that ends in an afternoon. Or if they just sit back in heavily fortified trenches and bombard the structure with artillery for 8 consecutive months.
Just flattening the local geography.
Right, and since the latter carries a higher probability of success with fewer variables, that is what they will execute.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
You call it a staggering tactical advantage, but isn't there a massive flaw in that logic? I mean, human beings, even genetically augmented super soldiers, are not actually calculators.
Well, no.
Don't troops need inspiration? Don't they need a belief in a higher cause or at least a sense of martial pride to maintain morale during an 8-month artillery slog in the freezing mud?
That is the logical assumption, yeah. But that's assuming the commanders view their troops as soldiers.
Oh.
Yeah. The Iron logic rewires that completely. The Iron Warriors do not view their own forces as brothers in arms in the traditional sense. They view them as ablative armor.
Wow. Just extra metal.
They view them as a numerical resource. When a commander looks at a heavily fortified wall, they don't see a daunting challenge requiring a rousing speech. They see a math problem.
And the sources outline exactly how they do that math, and it's chilling. It's literal cost-benefit analysis applied to human lives. There's a quote here. The structural integrity of this bastion requires 3 days of continuous shelling. The enemy return fire will eliminate approximately 4,212 of our auxiliary troops before the breach is made.
And then the punchline.
Yeah. The reserves are sufficient to cover this deficit. Proceed.
Proceed.
There is no mourning. There is no impassioned eulogy for the fallen. It is just the cost of doing business. It's industrial warfare taken to its absolute, suffocating extreme.
Which is exactly what makes them the architects of annihilation. They don't want to conquer a civilization so they can rule it and extract taxes. They don't want to defeat an enemy army just to prove they are the superior fighters.
No. If the Avi Legion is deployed against your world, the equation has already been finalized by their warsmiths.
And the solution is your total eradication down to the bedrock.
But, you know, the text makes it very clear that no one is just born like this. Like a legion doesn't just wake up one morning as a completely bitter, unfeeling machine obsessed with ash and casualty spreadsheets.
No, of course not.
The source material spends a massive amount of time on their origins, providing the psychological context for this behavior. And it all traces back to their Primarch, Perturabo, and the culture of their homeworld, Olympia.
Olympia is a fascinating case study in toxic perfectionism.
Oh, absolutely toxic.
It was a world of rugged mountains, warring city-states, and just relentless political maneuvering. Perturabo grew up in an environment where trust was a literal liability.
And intellectual superiority was the only currency that mattered.
Right. He was a polymath, a genuine genius in architecture, engineering, philosophy. But he was also deeply, deeply paranoid.
Incapable of accepting anything less than absolute perfection.
Exactly. From himself or his subordinates.
The texts paint this incredibly bleak picture of him. You have this brilliant, calculating mind in Perturabo, capable of designing utopian cities and wonders of civic engineering.
Beautiful things.
And when the Imperium of Man rediscovers him and gives him command of the Avi Legion, how do they utilize this incredible, specialized intellect?
Well, they treat him and his sons as glorified, expendable trench diggers.
Yeah, it's so frustrating to read.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the phrase from the historical logs that really anchors their entire narrative is that Perturabo felt forever slighted.
Forever slighted.
Yes. And when you examine the Great Crusade, the Imperium's massive campaign to conquer the galaxy, it is not hard to see why. The Imperium was expanding at an incredibly aggressive rate.
They were hitting some serious resistance.
Right. They encountered heavily fortified alien empires, nightmarish defensive grids, garrison worlds, places that simply had to be ground down through brutal, unglamorous attrition.
And they looked at the Iron Warriors' analytical minds and their stoic endurance and basically saw a bottomless well of laborers who wouldn't complain.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to question the fundamental management logic of the Imperium here.
Yeah.
because it seems mind-bogglingly short-sighted.
It really does.
You have these genius architects of destruction, the Sons of Olympia, whose minds are built to understand the deep mechanical truths of the universe, and you use them for the most degrading meat grinder campaigns.
Yeah.
It's like using a supercomputer to hammer in a nail. Like, yes, the supercomputer is heavy enough that it will eventually force the nail into the wood.
Yeah.
You are destroying the intricate machinery in the process.
Yeah.
And you are completely wasting its actual potential.
That's a great analogy. But consider the alternative perspective, though. The Imperium is managing a galactic conquest. They have other legions, like the Imperial Fists under Rogel Dorn.
Oh, the Golden Boys.
Right, or the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels. Those legions were given the shining compliances, the diplomatic victories, the glorious decapitation strikes against enemy leadership.
The stuff that gets statues built.
Exactly. But someone had to clear out the toxic radioactive fortresses. Someone had to dig the trenches in worlds where the atmosphere itself was corrosive. From the Imperium's logistical standpoint, the Iron Warriors were simply the most efficient tool for the worst jobs.
But that's exactly the problem. It's the utter lack of recognition. Like, the sources detail these horrific campaigns, right? Like the pacification of the Hrud.
Oh, the Hrud. That's a grim one.
The Hrud are these terrifying alien entities that generate localized temporal distortion fields. They literally age you to death just by being near them.
It's horrifying.
And the Imperium threw the Iron Warriors into the Saktrata Deeps to fight them in a subterranean grinding war of attrition.
The Hrud campaign is the perfect microcosm of their trauma. It wasn't a war of glorious conquest. It was a pest control operation in a nightmare environment. The Iron Warriors suffered catastrophic casualties. Space Marines, who are genetically engineered to be functionally immortal, were aging into dust in the trenches.
It's crumbling.
Right. And while they were bleeding out in the dark, dying of old age in their armor, other Primarchs were building statues of themselves on conquered paradises.
Exactly. And this is where the forever slighted complex metastasizes into a uniquely toxic loyalty. You do what you are told because it is your duty, but every single time you do it, the resentment compounds. You are digging a trench in radioactive mud, and with every shovel of dirt, you are mentally burying your respect for the masters who put you there.
Which brings us to the decimation.
Oh, man.
Yeah, it's a foundational event in the Legion's history that perfectly illustrates how Perturabo internalized this trauma and then inflicted it upon his own sons.
This part of the source material genuinely made my stomach drop. Explain the mechanics of this, because it highlights exactly how broken their internal culture became before the rebellion even started.
Right, so when Perturabo first took command of the 5e Legion, he reviewed their combat records. He didn't see veterans who had bled for the Imperium. He saw inefficiencies.
He just saw bad math.
He felt they were not meeting his impossible standards of mathematical perfection. So he instituted the ancient Roman practice of decimation.
And how did that work for them?
Perturabo ordered the entire Legion to assemble. He had them divided into groups of 10, and within each group of 10, one Space Marine was selected by a lottery.
Just at random.
Completely random. And the other 9 were then ordered to beat that randomly selected brother to death with their bare hands.
God.
And if they refused, they would be executed.
It's unfathomable. I mean, these are soldiers who have fought and bled together for decades, ordered to murder their own squad mates, not for treachery, but simply because their overall combat efficiency metrics were a few percentage points below the Primarch's expectations.
It established the ultimate baseline of iron logic. It taught the Legion, in the most visceral way possible, that their lives had absolutely zero intrinsic value.
You are just a number.
You are a number. If the equation demands your death, you die. Importantly, it severed their emotional bonds to each other.
Because how could you trust anyone after that?
Exactly. You cannot afford to love a brother that you might be ordered to bludgeon to death tomorrow for the sake of statistical optimization.
So, when the monumental civil war, known as the Horus Heresy, erupts, when half the Imperium's military turns against the Emperor, it's not exactly a shock that the Iron Warriors were among the first to turn traitor.
Not at all.
The text notes that their bitterness made them, quote, easy prey for the promises of the War Master.
Well, Horus, the War Master leading the rebellion, was a master psychologist. He didn't need to trick Perturabo. He didn't need to use warp sorcery or ideological brainwashing.
He didn't have to convince him the Emperor was evil.
No, he simply offered validation. He looked at the Iron Warriors, covered in the mud and ash of 100 thankless campaigns, and said, "You are right."
Wow, you're right. That's all it took.
They are using you. The Emperor is squandering your genius while rewarding the sycophants who build pretty walls on Terra. So let's go tear those walls down.
Validation is a terrifyingly powerful weapon when applied to a starving ego. Like, Horus took 10,000 years of pent-up kinetic resentment and finally gave it a directional target. For a Primarch like Perturabo, that isn't just an invitation to rebel. It is a long overdue mathematical reckoning.
And this profound nihilism, this deep-seated belief that you are nothing but a tool and that the universe operates on cruelty, it doesn't just stay in their heads as a philosophical grievance.
It bleeds out into everything.
It completely overrides their morality on the battlefield, because if life has no value and the masters you once served are inherently corrupt, there is no ethical limit to the weapons you will use to break a wall.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how they wage war. Let's get into the dirt with them, because the sources are incredibly detailed on their combat doctrine. Here's where it gets really interesting. If you fundamentally hate the system that built the walls, you dedicate your entire existence to becoming the ultimate expert at tearing them down.
Exactly.
The text makes it very clear. The Iron Warriors are the undisputed masters of siege warfare.
And siege warfare is a very specific, agonizing form of combat. It is the antithesis of a glorious cavalry charge.
There's nothing fast about it.
No. A proper siege requires extreme patience, hyper-complex mathematical geometry, and an utter lack of empathy. When the Iron Warriors lay siege to a planetary fortress, it is a masterclass in psychological and physical attrition. They don't just roll up and start shooting.
Walk us through the anatomy of an Iron Warrior siege. What does it actually look like on the ground?
Well, it begins with mathematics. Before a single drop pod is launched, their warsmiths have calculated the exact structural resonance of the enemy's walls.
Wait, really? The resonance?
Oh, yeah. The resonance, the caloric intake requirements of the defending population, the precise angles required for overlapping fields of artillery fire. Everything.
They know how many calories the defenders are eating.
They know exactly when they'll start starving. Then they arrive and immediately begin digging parallel trench networks, zigzagging toward the enemy fortifications to prevent enfilading fire.
And the sheer scale of the earth-moving operations described in the text is staggering. They essentially build an entire, heavily fortified subterranean city right outside your gates just to facilitate killing you.
Exactly. And then the bombardment begins. Not a frantic barrage, but a calculated, unending rhythm of artillery designed to psychologically break the defender.
Constant thudding, day and night.
They will mathematically sap the walls, digging underneath the foundations to collapse bastions into the earth. They will calculate the exact moment the defenders run out of clean water, wait 3 additional days for desperation to peak.
3 extra days just to let it set in.
Right. And then launch an assault composed entirely of expendable slave soldiers and penal legions just to deplete the enemy's ammunition.
They just send in waves of bodies to catch bullets.
Yes. Only when the mathematical certainty of victory reaches 99.9% do the actual Iron Warriors step foot inside the fortress to execute the survivors.
That is just bleak. And the pinnacle of this malicious architectural genius is something the sources call the Iron Cage.
Ah, the Iron Cage.
This is a historical event that perfectly encapsulates their mindset. So, following the Horus Heresy, the Imperium is trying to mop up the traitors. The Imperial Fists, who are the favored legion, the ones who got to build the Emperor's palace, they are hunting the Iron Warriors.
Perturabo knows this.
Perturabo knows this, so he builds a fortress on a world called Sebastus IV. But he doesn't build it to defend a strategic asset. He builds it solely as a trap.
The Iron Cage is perhaps the most spiteful piece of engineering in galactic history.
It's monumental spite.
Perturabo designed a sprawling, continent-sized fortress that had no central keep, no vital command center, and no strategic value whatsoever.
It was just a maze.
It was a massive, interlocking maze of kill zones, false corridors, collapsing ceilings, and cross-firing bunkers. It was a meat grinder designed for the sole purpose of bleeding the Imperial Fists.
And the Imperial Fists, driven by their own rigid sense of honor and duty, they walked right into it.
Of course they did.
They spent weeks fighting room by room, bunker by bunker, taking horrendous casualties, only to find that every victory just led into another pre-calculated ambush. The Iron Warriors weren't fighting to win a territory. They were fighting to balance an emotional ledger through geometry. They mathematically dismantled their rivals' pride.
That operation cements their reputation as the ultimate siege specialists. But, as we move deeper into the text, we encounter an element that completely flips the script on how we view these hyperlogical engineers.
Yeah, this is where it gets weird.
Because the 41st millennium is not just a universe of concrete and artillery. It is a universe where the warp, which is an alternate dimension of pure, chaotic emotion and supernatural horror, is a very real, tangible threat.
And this is the bizarre juxtaposition that makes the Ivy Legion so fascinating to me. Because other traitor factions that fled into the warp after the heresy, they tend to worship the entities they found there.
Right, the word bearers, the Emperor's children.
Exactly. They view the chaotic demons as dark gods to be revered, or they barter their souls for magical power, or they just become entirely corrupted by the madness of it all. But the Iron Warriors, they look at a dimension of ancient supernatural malice and they just see a new type of battery.
It is the ultimate expression of their iron logic. To an Iron Warrior, the idea of worshiping a warp entity is pathetic.
Because it implies subservience.
Yes, and they rebelled specifically to never be subservient again. So instead, they view demons as an exploitable resource. They are just esoteric variables to be plugged into the brutal equation of war.
Why build an altar to a bloodthirsty demon when you can violently bind it inside an artillery shell to exponentially increase its explosive yield?
Exactly.
I was reading the descriptions of these demon engines, and the mechanics of it are horrifying. Like, they don't summon a demon and ask it to fight for them.
No.
They literally build heavy armored chassis things like defilers, which are these massive multi-legged artillery walkers, or mauler fiends, which are basically giant mechanical siege beasts.
Nightmare fuel.
Absolute nightmare fuel. Then their specialized engineers, called warpsmiths, use dark rituals mixed with heavy industrial mechanics to forcibly drag a warp entity out of the ether and chain it to the machine's engine block.
And the psychological rigidity required to do that is astounding. You are dealing with entities composed of pure chaos, madness, and rage. To interact with that, to bind it and use it as a tool without falling into worship or insanity yourself, requires a mind that is terrifyingly disciplined.
You'd have to be so stubborn.
They assert their dominance over the irrational by physically forcing it to operate within their highly rational, deeply bitter framework. They literally weld armor plating over a demon's true form and install a steering mechanism.
It is such a staggeringly arrogant way to view the supernatural. Yes, you are an immortal nightmare entity from the realm of chaos.
Yeah.
Shut up and get in the furnace. We need to generate more torque to break this gate.
And that fusion of cold logic and warp horror creates weapons of unparalleled devastation. Consider the Obliterators.
Oh, the Obliterators.
These are a unique asset heavily utilized by the Iron Warriors. An Obliterator is a space marine who has been infected with a highly specific techno-organic warp virus.
The techno-organic virus.
Right. The virus essentially fuses the Marines' physical flesh with their power armor and their weaponry.
The sources describe them as walking fleshy arsenals. Like, their bodies could literally absorb weapons they find, and they could extrude different types of guns, plasma cannons, heavy bolters, las cannons, directly from their own biomatter, depending on what the tactical situation requires.
No. To any sane individual, becoming an undulating mass of flesh and shifting gun barrels would be a curse.
A horrific fate.
But to an Iron Warrior commander, the Obliterator virus is just an incredibly efficient logistical upgrade.
Wow.
Why worry about supply lines and carrying different types of ammunition when you can just infect your heavy weapons specialists and turn them into self-sustaining adaptive artillery platforms?
It all comes back to that dry, analytical approach to horror. The source text specifically highlights a document called a Warsmith's Testimony as evidence of their internal culture. And, when you hear the phrase warrior's testimony, you expect a passionate battle cry.
Something epic.
Right. We held the line against insurmountable odds. Our fury was unmatched. The gods favored our blades.
But an Iron Warrior Warsmith's testimony would sound more like a quarterly earnings report for mass destruction.
Exactly. It reads like a heavily redacted architectural audit.
It is entirely devoid of passion.
Let me read a piece of it. We achieved a 94.7% structural degradation of the primary bastion within 72 hours, expending precisely 30,112 auxiliary slave troops to deplete the enemy's Prometheum reserves, resulting in a mathematically inevitable collapse.
Mathematically inevitable.
The demon engines operated at peak efficiency, though coolant leaks in the tertiary warp binders resulted in a 2% drop in artillery cadence. It's horrific because the slaughter is so utterly mundane to them.
It's the banality of absolute destruction. And consider the title itself, Warsmith.
Right, Warsmith.
Not warlord.
They don't call their leaders lords or commanders or champions. A smith is a laborer, A smith works at a forge, shaping unyielding metal through extreme heat and repeated heavy strikes.
Pounding away at it.
That is how they view leadership in warfare. You are not inspiring your men. You are forging a weapon out of flesh and steel to strike against the anvil of the enemy's walls.
That raises a massive glaring contradiction, though.
What's that?
So what does this all mean? The text explicitly describes their current state in the 41st millennium as a fragmented legion. Oh.
They are no longer a unified, cohesive army under a single command structure. They are divided into countless isolated war bands, organized into what they call grand companies, and each is led by a warsmith who answers to absolutely no one but himself.
That's right.
If they were the ultimate masters of logical planning and engineering, why are they hopelessly fragmented? Isn't a fractured war machine inherently illogical?
This raises an important question, and it is the central paradox of their existence. It strikes at the very heart of why they rebelled in the first place. You have to trace the logic back to its bitter origin.
The Horus Heresy.
Right. They rebelled because they were tired of being used as disposable tools by a central authority, the Imperium. They hated the Emperor and the system for treating them as expendable cogs in a larger machine.
I follow you. They wanted independence from the toxic management structure.
Precisely. But when they broke away, when they tore down the structures of the Imperium, they didn't just reject the Emperor, they rejected the very concept of hierarchy above themselves. By refusing to ever be tools for anyone else again, they fundamentally destroyed their capacity for unity. A warsmith leading a grand company refuses to bow to another, more powerful warsmith, because to do so would be to submit to the exact same dynamic they bled to escape 10,000 years ago.
Oh, that is a brutal irony. Their absolute unyielding demand for independence is what crippled them. They achieved the freedom they wanted. They answered to no one. They are the masters of their own fate. But in doing so, they lost the overwhelming cohesive power that made them a legion in the first place.
Yes.
They went from being the greatest siege army in the galaxy
Yeah.
to a collection of brilliant but deeply isolated paranoid warlords.
It is the tragic failure of iron logic when applied to society. They can calculate the exact resonance frequency required to shatter a planetary fortress. They can design flawless siege engines powered by the screams of chained demons.
But they can't get along with each other.
But they cannot build a functional, unified society among themselves. Their bitterness is so profound, so ingrained in their genetic and psychological makeup, that it turns inward just as easily as it turns outward.
I want to paint a mental picture of what this actually looks like in the galaxy today, because it's wild. Imagine these grand companies operating out in the Eye of Terror, particularly on their current stronghold world of Medrengard.
Medrengard is a nightmare.
Medrengard isn't a unified empire with a bustling capital. The sources describe it as a nightmarish industrial hellscape. It is a planet entirely covered in continent-sized fortresses, endless trench networks, and towering spires of black iron.
And each of those fortresses belongs to a different warsmith.
Just sitting there.
They sit in the center of their own personal mechanical fiefdoms, completely paranoid, endlessly fortifying their own positions against each other.
Exactly, because every single warsmith is stubbornly, arrogantly convinced that their specific brutal equation, their specific interpretation of iron logic, is the only mathematically correct one.
And if your logic is mathematically absolute, then by definition, any other warsmith's logic is flawed and must be eradicated.
So they just fight.
This leads to endless grinding infighting. Grand companies will besiege each other's fortresses on Medrengard just as readily and just as ruthlessly as they will besiege the Imperium.
Wow.
They will spend decades bombing a rival warsmith's citadel into dust, simply to prove whose artillery calculations are superior. It is a terrifying, purgatorial existence. They are trapped in a self-made prison of endless logical warfare.
It's a perfect closed-loop system of misery, which really pulls back the lens on the overarching theme of this deep dive.
It does.
We've looked at their toxic origins on Olympia, the horrors of the Hri campaigns and the decimation, their mastery of the Iron Cage, and their current state as paranoid, demonic engineers. But the source material ends with a very powerful synthesis of what the Iron Warriors represent on a cosmic scale.
The ultimate horror.
The final section is titled, The Ultimate Horror of the Iron Warriors. And after everything we've discussed, the horror isn't just that they have big guns or that they shove demons into tanks.
No, the true horror is philosophical, and it is entirely self-inflicted by the Imperium. The text explicitly states that the Iron Warriors are the living embodiment of the Imperium's self-destructive use of its own tools.
That line is the thesis statement of their entire existence. They are a legion broken by a perfect storm. Their Primarch's inherent bitterness, perfectly catalyzed by the Imperium's callous disregard for their lives.
Exactly.
The conclusion the source draws is profound for this universe. In the grim darkness of the far future, the greatest threats often come not from the alien monsters outside, but from the broken, neglected souls within.
It is an incredible piece of dark, poetic justice. Think about what the Imperium actually wanted when they originally deployed the Ivy Legion during the Great Crusade.
They wanted the sledgehammer.
They didn't want heroes. They wanted unfeeling, uncomplaining tools of destruction. They wanted a force that would just execute the grueling math of war without asking questions, without demanding glory, without needing to be praised or validated.
They wanted a machine that just did the dirty work and stayed quiet.
They wanted a machine, and they succeeded entirely too well. They built the perfect, unfeeling machine of destruction. But because they treated that machine with such intense cruelty, because they deliberately disregarded the human elements of pride, trauma, and the fundamental need for validation, the machine inevitably turned its crosshairs around.
They are the monstrous logical consequence of a fundamentally abusive system. I mean, they aren't cartoon villains twirling their mustaches because they worship evil for evil's sake. They are the bill coming due.
The text calls them a reminder and a warning that even the most loyal of servants can be driven to treason by the cruelty of their masters.
And that is why they are the Imperium's ultimate horror. The Imperium spends its existence fighting Tyranids, orcs, and ancient alien threats, and those are terrifying in their own right. But the Iron Warriors are the Imperium's own architectural sins coming back to haunt them, heavily armed with siege weaponry.
Every time an Imperial defender looks out from their fortress walls at an approaching Iron Warrior army, they are looking at the direct result of their own empire's historical arrogance.
I can't even fathom the psychological terror for those defenders. The text says the Iron Warriors' ultimate goal is to reduce the Imperium to the same dust that it so casually discarded them upon.
It's a terrifying mission statement.
Imagine being an Imperial guardsman on the wall of a fortress world. You see the trenches being dug. You hear the unending rhythmic pounding of the artillery. You know they don't want to negotiate. You know they don't take prisoners. But the absolute worst part, you know that the enemy at the gates knows exactly how those gates were built.
Because they built them.
Because they built them.
That is the insurmountable tactical nightmare. The Iron Warriors know the microfractures in the foundation because they poured the concrete 10,000 years ago.
Wow.
They know the blind spots in the defensive auger grid because they designed the grid's overlapping sensor cones. There is no tricking them, there is no outsmarting them in a siege because they literally wrote the textbook on Imperial siegecraft.
Right.
And they have spent every single day of the last 10 millennia refining the mathematics of how to utterly dismantle it.
It really brings the whole tragedy full circle. The architects of bitter logic. They built the house, they were treated like dirt and cooked out into the cold, and now they are methodically dismantling it, brick by brick. Not with screaming passion, but by calmly executing a mathematical certainty of revenge.
Mathematical certainty.
But we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started in the mud of Olympia, examining a Primarch and a legion that felt forever slighted. We saw how the trauma of the herd campaigns and the horrors of the decimation forged their philosophy of iron logic.
Where war is just a brutal equation of firepower and expended lives.
Exactly. We explored how that deep-seated resentment made them the perfect weapon for Horus to aim at the Emperor. We examined their terrifying combat doctrine, from the malicious architecture of the Iron Cage to the cold industrial enslavement of warp demons in their siege engines.
And finally, we looked at how their absolute refusal to be tools left them as a fragmented brotherhood of paranoid warsmiths.
Serving as the ultimate, horrifying mirror reflecting the Imperium's own historical cruelty.
It is a dense, incredibly rich narrative about the long-term consequences of systemic neglect. And, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that pulls this dynamic out of the sci-fi setting and into reality.
Let's hear it.
We've just spent this deep dive looking at the catastrophic fallout when a massive system treats its foundational pillars as completely disposable. The text warns us that unchecked cruelty drives even the most steadfast loyalty into treason. So strip away the power armor and the artillery and consider the mechanics of the systems you interact with every day. Okay. If a system, whether that is a massive corporate structure, a local community organization, or even a personal relationship, demands absolute dedication but offers absolute callousness in return, isn't it essentially engineering its own demise?
Wow. Yeah.
When we treat people purely as resources, as numbers on a spreadsheet to be optimized and discarded, we shouldn't be surprised when they eventually apply that same cold transactional logic right back to us. What iron warriors are we unwittingly creating right now simply by treating the people holding up our walls as nothing more than expendable cogs in the machine?
That is a phenomenal and somewhat unsettling question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the structures around you, keep looking closely at the foundations, and we will see you next time.